Welcome back, everyone. This is part 10 of the Sgraffito mask, which is going to be the Sgraffito carving. Um, this is basically the final step before I'm going to call it good on the end of this project. So I'm going to kind of do a couple different things here that I'm going to explain before I get into the carving. Basically, how I was able to transfer the image that I drew onto the surface of the paper and how I was able to transfer that onto the surface of the mask. You can use the paper as a stencil and just kind of lay it down and kind of retrace your lines onto the clay and leave an impression with a good amount of pressure with a pencil. And that's how I kind of planned things out when I started the actual forehead design of this symbol. So what I was able to do was take the paper, and because it was the exact same size from that little cup, the circle to start with, and then I was able to transfer the exact design right onto the surface of the clay before I filled in the areas with my black underglaze. Now, I'm going to take another step to this. I'm going to make it look a little bit more interesting by using the actual Sgraffito technique within those three black sections. So I'm going to make a diagonal line kind of the way I drew it with the pencil on the paper, but I'm going to use something a little bit more minimal and just do stripes across each of those sections. And I'm going to use a couple different tools after that to actually carve the lines in a little bit deeper. But first, I want a nice straight edge, a piece of paper, something that's going to have a little bit of thickness to it. And then I'm going to use that as my line creator when I start putting them down onto the actual clay surface on the forehead there. So the straight edge of that paper should be just a little bit bigger than the overall circle, because I'm going to be able to connect my lines between the black areas. And I'm going to space it out maybe 1/8 of an inch or so between. Now I want to work from my left to my right, but I also want to use the straight edge so that I can actually see my line after I draw it on, so I can kind of plan out my spacing properly. If I don't go in the same direction or go from left to right, because I am left-handed, and pull the paper away each time to kind of create the spacing for each line, I won't be able to see what I have just done, and I won't be able to space it properly if I do it a different way. So I want to make sure that I move my paper each time I make my line with the pencil very lightly, kind of testing out the spacing right now. But I'm able to actually see every single line that I've already made and then continue that same spacing as I go through each of the sections with the pencil. And you can see how it's slowly starting to form a bit of a black and white pattern. I will go back over this in just a second with a couple of the tools that I have over on the left side of the table right there. And you can see some of the lines showing up just with the light pencil touch, but then I'm going to actually carve through a little bit deeper with one of the blades over there on the left side on the table there. So I really take my time. I'm really focused on making sure the spacing is the same between each line, because it's going to become a pattern, and I want it to be something that you can see that's repeatable, and something that's going to be kind of predictable, which kind of defines what a pattern really is about. Something that you can predict after you're seeing a few of them in a row. So it's taking on a new shape, taking on a new kind of form with those lines coming through the black areas. And now I'm going to test out what I've been normally using is pretty much the arrow-shaped blade. And I'm going to just go through the exact same lines because I like how they were set up. But I'm going to take my knife, that kind of arrow-shaped blade and knife, and I'm going to use the tip of it and kind of scrape down into the clay a little bit deeper, so they become much more refined, and they define the transition between each section a little bit better. And they'll start to pick up a much stronger contrast between the black underglaze and the clay underneath. So what I'm doing is basically exposing the clay underneath again after I had painted 2 layers of the black underglaze onto the surface of the clay. You can only do this at the right time, which is the leather hard stage. If you try to do it too soon, the black will smear and it won't come cleanly off the surface. If you do it too late, and the clay is getting close to bone dry, then you might have some issues with the edges. They might not cut very cleanly, and they're going to kind of crackle off and crumble off when you do the actual carving through the surface. So it should be leather hard, and you should try to make sure you don't wipe your hands across the black underglaze, because it'll smear some of the white or the gray clay body onto the surface and ruin some of the surface of your black underglaze. So what I try to do is leave it alone after I'm carving it. I don't want to use my fingers at all on the surface, but I might use a dry, stiff brush if the clay feels like it's dry enough. And then I can kind of sweep off any of the little chunks that might still be stuck onto the surface. If you have a nice, clean, stiff, dry brush, you'll be able to kind of wipe away what you need to wipe away without using your fingers or any other tools on the surface. So that's kind of where I was doing that right there. After that, I want to kind of lower that surface around those black areas, so that kind of that interior design that I have there, I'm going to take the same tool and I'm just going to make very short little strokes and cut into the clay and change the level of the surface right there. So it's going to be a little bit lower than the black areas. So I'm taking my time and making sure that I use short strokes so I don't ruin my design. I don't want to cut into the black areas anywhere, except for maybe a couple little spots where the brush might have painted outside the line of what I was looking for. So this is the time to kind of clean up any of those little mess up marks that you might have made when you're brushing on the surface of the black underglaze. And you can start to see it take shape, and it'll have a texture to it because it'll be just short little strokes with that knife kind of blade, and I'm using kind of in a direction, kind of going around each section and kind of pulling out from the corners and making sure that I don't accidentally remove too much of the black design. And I'm just going to work away all the way around on the inside and try to make sure that I'm removing about the same level of clay, so it looks like it's kind of just dropped a layer or a level compared to the black areas. But I'm also trying to make sure that I don't scrape away all the three-dimensional qualities that I've already put into the mask, especially around those eyebrows. So I want to leave a couple wrinkles and a couple different things that are going to be a little bit deeper, and I want to make sure that I don't get rid of those by accidentally removing too much of the clay. So it's going to be just a change of depth between the black symbol and that center, almost kind of like star kind of shape. And I'm just using that same knife the whole way through. It's got a nice sharp little point to it, and I can kind of scrape. I'm not really cutting a line, I'm kind of scraping across the clay until it digs down into it a little bit. There's other tools, loop tools, needle tools, different things that you could use to get into areas that you wouldn't be able to normally get into. But for my purpose and for what I've been doing, I've really enjoyed using that little arrow-shaped blade to help me with the Sgraffito technique. Once I get the whole thing scraped away, it's going to be a matter of just making sure that I smooth things out, and I can use a couple of different things, tools that I might have around the house or in the studio to be able to smooth out the clay that's got that texture from all the scratching that I've been doing to remove the clay. You can use Q-tips, just dip them in water a little bit so they have a soft edge to them, and then that will kind of help level out all the scratch surface that you might have from the result of this Sgraffito technique. You can also use an eraser, the end of a pencil, use the eraser part of it, and you can get into areas that you wouldn't be able to smooth out with your fingers or with other tools that you might have available for yourself. So once you've done the scratching surface and remove some of that bare clay areas to kind of change the level, I'm going to just go around and check my lines on the other parts that I've actually applied a couple layers of black underglaze. A couple of those areas were a little bit outside the lines, so I needed to fix them and kind of scrape away. You never want to wipe with a damp sponge some of the areas that you might have messed up on. because it'll smear and get into the areas that you do not want to have any black, and it'll stay there. So always scrape it away and then clean it up carefully with an eraser tool, a little bit of water on a Q-tip, or something else that you feel like is going to work for you to kind of level things out and smooth things out in those cracks and in those areas that you can't reach with your fingers. So overall, I just have a little bit more of work with the carving part of it before I decide to start smoothing things out. And after that, it might be a little bit of edges and things to clean up, but overall, I think my design and my form is done. All right, good luck.